Did you just slap her? The entire first-class cabin froze. Time stopped. A 76-year-old black woman stood trembling, one hand on her cheek, her eyes wide with disbelief. Mrs. Evelyn St. James hadn't expected her flight to Washington, D.C. to begin like this. What was supposed to be a peaceful anniversary trip had turned into a moment of public humiliation. The sound of that slap still echoed off the cabin walls as stunned passengers looked on, mouths agape. It all began earlier that morning at LAX. Evelyn had always been a quiet woman, dignified. She dressed modestly, a cream-colored knit sweater, a long navy skirt, and a tan hat perched neatly on her silver curls. Her soft leather handbag and a small carry-on were all she brought. No designer brands, no flash. She wasn't one for spectacle, but she was someone important, though you wouldn't know it by looking. Evelyn was the wife of Malcolm St. James, co-founder and chairman of SkyVista Airlines. Not that she ever flaunted it. In fact, most people who met her had no idea who she really was. And that's just how she liked it. Today was a special day. She and Malcolm were celebrating their 40th wedding anniversary, and they were headed to a quiet resort outside D.C. As was her habit, Evelyn arrived early and boarded first. Malcolm had a quick board meeting and planned to join her on the flight just before takeoff. Evelyn's ticket, first-class seat 2A, was scanned without issue. She smiled politely at the staff and walked to her seat. But before she could sit down, a woman in a tight navy blue uniform with a flawless bun stepped in front of her. Amanda Klein, lead flight attendant. Amanda was used to managing high-powered passengers, tech execs, movie stars, politicians. She prided herself on being efficient, polished, and above all in control. So when she saw Evelyn, a plainly dressed elderly black woman walking confidently into first-class, alarm bells rang in her head. Amanda narrowed her eyes. "Ma'am, I believe you've made a wrong turn. Coach is back that way." Evelyn smiled gently. "I don't believe so, dear. I'm in 2A. Amanda's face remained frozen. "May I see your ticket?" Evelyn handed it over calmly. Amanda glanced at it. Her eyes hesitated at the name Evelyn St. James and then flicked back up. Her tone stiffened. "This doesn't look right." Evelyn tilted her head. "I assure you it's correct." Several nearby passengers looked up. A man in 2C shifted uncomfortably. A younger woman across the aisle paused her phone conversation, sensing tension. Amanda took a step forward. "I'm going to need you to wait off to the side while I get this sorted. This section is reserved for priority passengers." Evelyn didn't budge. "I am a priority passenger." There was no anger in her voice, no defiance, just quiet certainty. And that somehow infuriated Amanda more than yelling ever could. "Ma'am," Amanda snapped, raising her voice, "this seat is not for you. I don't know where you got this ticket, but unless you want me to call security." A phone began recording. "I think you should lower your voice," Evelyn said, finally showing a flicker of discomfort. "You're making a scene." Amanda stepped closer. "I'll do more than that if you don't get out of my way." Then, without warning, Amanda reached for the ticket still in Evelyn's hand, yanked it, and as Evelyn instinctively tried to pull it back, Amanda's open palm swung forward and slapped her across the cheek. A sharp gasp filled the cabin. The sound was unmistakable. The impact was brutal. The video phone zoomed in. Evelyn stumbled a step back, visibly shaking her hand pressed to her face. Her eyes filled with pain, but not just physical pain. It was the humiliation, the disbelief. A man in the back row of first class stood abruptly. He had just boarded. "Did you just slap her?" he demanded. Amanda blinked, realizing what she'd done. Her face went pale. She grabbed me first." "Is this how you treat elderly passengers?" another woman called out. A flurry of phones were now recording. One passenger rushed to Evelyn. "Ma'am, are you all right? Do you want to sit down?" Evelyn gently nodded and was helped to her seat, still 2A. She never moved from it. Then the man who had shouted earlier walked forward, his face full of fury. He had a calm power in his steps, his salt and pepper beard, his designer cufflinks, his voice low, commanding. "Excuse me, what is your name?" Amanda turned slowly. I'm Amanda, the lead." "You're the lead," he said. "Perfect. You can lead yourself off this plane." Amanda blinked. "I don't understand. Who are you?" He stepped closer. "I'm Malcolm St. James, chairman of SkyVista, and that woman you just slapped, that's my wife." Gasps again. A stunned silence fell over the cabin. Amanda took a step back. "Security is already on its way," Malcolm continued. "And trust me, when we land, you'll be escorted out by more than a supervisor. I want a full investigation, and I want it now." Evelyn looked at her husband, still quiet, still dignified. She gave him a small nod. She wasn't angry, just deeply, profoundly disappointed. Amanda's mouth opened, but no words came out. Passengers clapped. Someone whispered, "She's done." And somewhere on the internet, a video titled, "Flight Attendant Slaps Elderly Black Woman. Then Finds Out She's the Airline Owner's Wife," was already going viral. As Malcolm St. James' words rang through the cabin, a heavy silence settled in the air. People sat up straighter. The flight attendants standing in the galley exchanged confused glances. Amanda, still stunned, had no idea what to do next. She looked like a deer caught in headlights, her mouth slightly open but completely silent. Malcolm took a slow, deliberate breath. "I've stayed quiet for long enough, but now I'm speaking as a husband and as your employer." Evelyn remained seated in 2A, eyes downcast, still holding her cheek. Her dignity hadn't wavered, but the redness on her face spoke louder than words. She wasn't one for public outbursts, and even now she resisted becoming emotional. But inside she was trembling. Amanda finally found her voice, but it cracked under pressure. I didn't mean to. She wasn't cooperating." A middle-aged woman sitting across the aisle leaned over toward Amanda. "We saw everything. She didn't do anything wrong. You were aggressive from the beginning." Another passenger added, "Yeah, and that slap, completely uncalled for." Amanda took a step back. Her eyes scanned the cabin, desperate for support, but there was none. Even the co-pilot, who had come out to investigate the commotion, was standing by the door, arms crossed, watching closely. Then came the walk of shame. Malcolm nodded to a young male flight attendant standing in the aisle. "Get your supervisor on the phone. I want a report filed before this plane leaves the tarmac." Amanda's voice turned defensive. "But Mr. St. James, I've been with Sky Vista for 7 years. And that's 7 years too long if you treat passengers like this." Malcolm interrupted coldly. "Especially my wife." The moment those words came out, Amanda's legs buckled slightly. She'd known he was powerful, but she had no idea the woman she slapped was the Evelyn St. James. The Evelyn who had a wing named after her in the Sky Vista Aviation Academy. The Evelyn who quietly attended every board meeting, sitting next to the founder himself. She looked over at Evelyn, hoping for forgiveness. "Ma'am, I didn't recognize you." Evelyn finally raised her head. Her voice was soft but piercing. "Would it have made a difference if you had?" Amanda didn't respond. The other passengers murmured their agreement, and several continued filming. Twitter was already flooded with the story. Hashtags like Wash Sky Vista Scandal and Ashichash Slap at 30,000 feet were trending. Videos of Amanda's outburst were racking up thousands of views by the minute. The plane hadn't even left the gate. At that moment, an airport supervisor boarded the plane, flanked by 2 security officers. The atmosphere grew even heavier as he approached Malcolm and Amanda. "Mr. St. James," the supervisor greeted nervously. "We got your message. Is there an issue?" "There is," Malcolm replied. "This flight attendant assaulted my wife and humiliated her in front of the entire cabin. I want her removed from this flight immediately. Her employment status can be discussed later." Amanda began to protest. "Please, sir." But the supervisor raised a hand. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to step off the plane." The security officers flanked her, not touching her, but making their presence known. Amanda's face flushed red with a mix of embarrassment and regret. She turned to Evelyn one last time. "I really am sorry," she whispered. But Evelyn didn't answer. She simply turned her face toward the window, away from the woman who had treated her like she didn't belong. Amanda gathered her things with trembling hands and walked down the aisle under the disapproving stares of every passenger. Not a single person stood up for her. Not one offered a kind word. She had made her decision, and now she was paying for it. As the cabin doors shut again, a calmness returned. The pilot announced a brief delay due to an incident on board and promised they'd be in the air shortly. The passengers nodded quietly, still processing what they'd witnessed. Malcolm sat down beside his wife. "Are you all right, my love?" Evelyn nodded. "I've had worse. But I never thought I'd be slapped on an airplane for having the nerve to sit in the seat I paid for." He took her hand. "You shouldn't have had to. She'll never work for this airline again." Evelyn gave him a small smile, but it faded quickly. "You know, I'm not upset for me. I'm upset for the people she's treated like this, who weren't married to the chairman, who didn't have anyone to stand up for them." Malcolm sat back, her words weighing heavily in his chest. She was right. This wasn't just about one slap. As the cabin door closed again behind Amanda's departure, a hushed sense of awe remained in the air. No one spoke for several moments. The usual sounds of boarding overhead bins, slamming seatbelts clicking, whispered conversations all faded into the background. People stared at Evelyn, some with admiration, others with shame, a few with tears in their eyes. A young flight attendant, no older than 24, hesitantly approached her, holding a cup of water. "Ma'am, would you like something to drink?" Evelyn looked up at her. The girl's face was flushed, eyes watery. It was clear she was shaken by what her superior had done. Evelyn accepted the water with a small, graceful nod. "Thank you, dear. What's your name?" "Jasmine." "Thank you, Jasmine. You have a kind spirit." The girl smiled weakly, then turned to return to the galley. Before she left, Evelyn added, "Don't let anyone teach you that kindness is weakness." Jasmine nodded. She wouldn't forget those words. Meanwhile, in seat 2B, Malcolm sat quietly beside his wife, watching her carefully. He knew she was holding everything in the hurt, the anger, the disappointment, and it made him furious. "I'm sorry," he said at last. Evelyn turned to him. "For what?" "For not being there when it happened. I should have boarded with you." She reached out and took his hand. "You were exactly where you needed to be, and you stepped in at exactly the right time." He gave her hand a light squeeze, but his jaw was still clenched. Across the aisle, a teenage boy tapped on his mother's sleeve and whispered something. The woman stood up. She looked to be in her early 40s with olive skin and a confident posture. She walked over to Evelyn and bent down. "I just wanted to say, you didn't deserve that. No one does. But the way you handled yourself with grace, my son just watched that, and he's never going to forget it." Evelyn blinked, then offered a smile. "What's his name?" "Diego." Evelyn turned and looked at the boy, who was now peeking over his seat shyly. "Hi, Diego." She gave a small wave. "Always speak up when something's not right, but do it with dignity." The boy nodded solemnly, a lesson that would stick with him for life. As more passengers prepared for takeoff, something remarkable happened. One by one, people began stopping by Evelyn's seat. A man in a suit offered his business card and said, "If you ever need legal support on the house." A grandmother handed Evelyn a tissue and whispered, "You remind me of my sister." A college student with pink hair and earbuds and leaned over and said, "That was messed up, but you're a badass." Each encounter was brief but deeply human. The entire cabin was witnessing something rare, a moment of quiet collective accountability. The captain made an announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the delay. Due to an earlier situation involving crew conduct, we will be departing shortly. Thank you for your patience and understanding." And with that, the plane began to taxi. But something was different now. The energy had shifted. The whole plane, even the air itself, seemed to be watching Evelyn. Not just because of what had happened, but because of how she responded. There was no shouting, no dramatic outburst, no threats. Just a powerful kind of silence, the kind that demanded respect. The kind that changed people. As they reached cruising altitude, Evelyn closed her eyes briefly and took a deep breath. She didn't want to cry. Not here. Not now. Not with all these people watching. But her thoughts raced. She wondered how many other passengers over the years had been dismissed, ridiculed, or mistreated simply because they didn't look like they belonged in first class. She thought of the gate attendants who'd glanced skeptically at her boarding pass. The Uber driver who had asked, "You sure you're flying first class that morning?" All of it quietly accumulated. But today, finally, it burst. Malcolm could see the weight in her shoulders. "After this trip, I want you to take a break," he said. "No board meetings, no appearances. Just peace." Evelyn smiled faintly. "Peace sounds nice." Then she looked him in the eye. "But I'm not done speaking. I need to say something. To the company, to the public. Not just because she slapped me, but because she could." Malcolm nodded. "Then we'll help you say it." The next few hours passed quietly. The new flight crew treated Evelyn with the utmost respect, not because of her husband's title, but because they now understood who she was. A woman of grace, a woman of fire, a woman who did not raise her voice, but raised everyone else's awareness. As the plane began its descent into Washington, D.C., Evelyn opened the Notes app on her phone and began typing. The first line read, "This isn't about me. This is about every person who's ever been told without words that they don't belong." When the wheels touched down in Washington, D.C., Evelyn felt the familiar tremble of the aircraft's landing gear roll through her feet. The moment they came to a full stop at the gate, passengers began to rustle around her, reaching for bags, stretching legs, checking their phones. But Evelyn didn't move. Instead, she sat still, her phone in her lap, the Notes app still open. The sentence she'd typed earlier remained there, glowing gently. "This isn't about me. This is about every person who's ever been told without words that they don't belong." She had more to say. Malcolm noticed she hadn't stood. Do you want help gathering your things? She shook her head. Give me 1 more minute. He sat back down. He knew that look in her eyes, it meant something important was forming. And when Evelyn St. James had something to say, the world usually listened. Gaseta Narasuran missed him. That night, after checking into their hotel suite, Malcolm received several calls from Sky Vista board members, all asking what had happened. He calmly said the report was being prepared. The media had already caught wind of it. Footage had leaked, trending across platforms under hashtags like Ashern Sky Vista Slap and Ashern Evelyn was seated right. But Evelyn didn't want to talk to the press. She had something else in mind. Cyril. By morning, her letter was complete. She had written every word herself. No PR filter, no lawyer review, just truth. The subject line read, an open letter from Evelyn St. James for every passenger who felt invisible. The letter was posted to Sky Vista's official website and emailed to every employee and frequent flyer. It began simply, I wasn't slapped because I was loud. I wasn't slapped because I was aggressive. I was slapped because I didn't look like someone who belongs in seat 2A. She detailed what happened, not with vengeance, but with precision. She explained the quiet assumptions, the microaggressions, the ways people look past women like her. She described Amanda's dismissal, the passenger's silence, and then their awakening. And then she wrote, you don't have to slap someone to make them feel small. Sometimes all it takes is a glance, a sigh, a refusal to believe they belong. But sometimes it does take a slap to wake everyone else up. She concluded with a pledge to work with Sky Vista's leadership to implement mandatory bias and empathy training across the company, not just for flight crews, but for everyone from the boardroom to the tarmac. The letter was signed simply, Evelyn. A scene. Within hours, the message went viral. TV anchors read excerpts on air. Activists and authors reshared her words. Corporate leaders applauded her courage. Former flight attendants chimed in, admitting that Evelyn said what many of us have seen for years. A Sky Vista board member privately emailed her that afternoon. We thought you were just the quiet co-founder's wife, but your voice, it's exactly what we needed. She didn't reply. She didn't have to. The following week, Evelyn was invited to speak at the company's annual leadership summit. Normally, she would have declined, but not this time. Dressed in her signature beige sweater and modest pearls, she took the stage. The ballroom was full, executives, pilots, HR reps, crew managers, and hundreds of employees watching via live stream. Her first words were quiet. Raise your hand if you've ever been judged before saying a word. Nearly every hand went up. Now raise your hand if you've ever done the judging. Most hands stayed up. She let the silence settle. We all carry bias. What matters is what we choose to do with it. Her speech lasted just 9 minutes. But those 9 minutes changed Sky Vista Airlines forever. In the weeks that followed, the company launched a new internal initiative, the Evelyn Program, a cross-departmental effort to combat unconscious bias, elevate passenger dignity, and create accountability for how people are treated in the air. Amanda, the former flight attendant, never returned to Sky Vista. But in a surprising twist, Evelyn requested that her story not be about punishment, but progress. I don't want to ruin someone's life. I want them to understand why their actions matter, and I want them to do better. Months later, while boarding another flight, this time to speak at a diversity forum in Atlanta, Evelyn was approached by a young black woman in uniform. Mrs. St. James, my name is Layla. I'm new here. You're the reason I applied. Evelyn smiled gently. Then let's make sure they never forget why you were hired. And with that, she stepped into seat 2A again, this time with the entire airline watching and finally understanding. 3 days after Evelyn's open letter was published, Sky Vista Airlines faced a moment of reckoning. The corporate headquarters in Chicago was buzzing. Media outlets were camped outside the glass tower lobby. Social media was flooded with passengers sharing stories, some heartbreaking, others infuriating. But one thing was clear. Evelyn's story had pulled back the curtain on something far deeper than a single slap. Inside the company's top-floor executive conference room, the air was tense. CEO Jordan Mitchell, a polished man in his early 50s, known for his carefully crafted statements, sat at the head of the table. To his left was Malcolm St. James, co-founder, now mostly retired, but still a powerful voice. To his right, the new VP of People and Culture, Adira Cole, was furiously taking notes. A large monitor displayed a real-time feed of trending topics, Evelyn speaks. Your bias 35,000 feet. She belonged into a. Jordan rubbed his temple. We've handled crises before. PR can contain it. But this. Malcolm interrupted him, calm but firm. This isn't just a PR problem. This is a culture problem. And my wife, whether you expected it or not, just gave us a chance to fix it. Adira nodded. I've received over 4,000 emails from employees in just 48 hours. Flight attendants, mechanics, even janitorial staff. They're thanking Evelyn. They're telling stories. Most of them have never felt seen until now. Another executive chimed in. We've had complaints before, but nothing went viral. It's the visibility that's different. No, Malcolm said. It's the silence that broke. Meanwhile, Evelyn watched from afar. She wasn't interested in being the face of a scandal. She had said what she needed to say. But when she saw that the company wasn't retreating, wasn't burying it, she allowed herself a flicker of hope. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from a woman she'd never met. I'm a gate agent in Kansas City. I've been passed up for promotion 3 times. But after reading your letter, I finally spoke to HR. That was the 5th message of the morning. Evelyn gently placed the phone down, closed her eyes, and whispered, let this count for something. I'll return to one. By the end of the week, Jordan Mitchell held a press conference. Flanked by Malcolm and Adira, he announced sweeping new changes at Sky Vista. Mandatory racial bias training for all employees, including executives. A confidential hotline for reporting discrimination routed to an independent oversight board. Quarterly listening sessions with employee groups from underrepresented backgrounds. And a new initiative called Seat 2A, a mentorship and development program for frontline staff from marginalized communities named in honor of Evelyn's story. When asked if the airline was doing this just for public image, Jordan replied, we're doing it because one woman refused to stay silent and because too many of us stayed silent for too long. At a smaller private celebration in Washington, D.C., Sky Vista held a small gathering to honor Evelyn. It wasn't lavish. No stage, no spotlight, just a group of employees from all levels, seated in a circle with coffee and cookies. Jasmine, the young flight attendant who had offered Evelyn water on the plane, spoke up. I've only been flying for 18 months, but I've seen things, and I felt afraid to speak. Mrs. St. James, when you didn't yell, when you didn't fight, you just stood there with dignity. It changed me. Evelyn smiled warmly. Dignity doesn't mean silence. It means knowing who you are, even when others try to tell you who you're not. Later that evening, Malcolm joined her on the balcony of their hotel, overlooking the quiet D.C. skyline. I've been thinking, he said, sipping his tea, about how many times we've been dismissed quietly. In meetings, at airports, even in restaurants. Evelyn didn't answer immediately. Then that's the part people don't see. That it's not just the big slap. It's the small ones, the invisible ones, every day. She turned to him, eyes steady. But I think people are starting to see now. Indeed they were. Sky Vista's competitors began launching similar programs. One airline even invited Evelyn to consult on inclusion strategies. University professors requested to use her letter in their ethics courses. Civil rights leaders invited her to speak, but she declined most of the invitations. Instead, she started writing again. Not for media, not for applause, just for those who needed a voice they could trust. Her second letter, posted quietly a month later, was titled, Not a Slap, a Spark. And in it she wrote, if something I didn't ask for became a spark, then let every moment of pain serve a greater fire. Let dignity rise where silence once lived. That spark would go on to light far more than a single corporate policy shift. It would change careers. It would shape conversations. It would be passed down in flight attendant training manuals. It would be whispered in terminals and taught in boardrooms. And through it all, Evelyn would remain seated not just in seat 2A, but in the hearts of those who finally knew what it meant to belong. The summer following Evelyn's open letter was one of quiet transformation. Within Sky Vista Airlines, something had shifted, not just in policy or training schedules, but in the atmosphere. It was in the way gate agents paused before assuming, in the way cabin crews welcomed passengers with sincerity instead of script. Even in corporate meetings, her name came up like a quiet force. Would Evelyn approve of this? Became an unofficial filter for decisions. She hadn't set out to change the sky, but somehow she had. One Thursday morning, Evelyn received a handwritten letter in the mail. It wasn't from a politician or executive. It was from a 14-year-old named Caleb in Cleveland. Dear Mrs. St. James, my mom works for Sky Vista as a cleaner. She's worked nights my whole life. She said you made them listen to her story at a company meeting. I didn't know her job mattered to anyone. Thank you for making her proud. Evelyn sat at the dining table holding the letter in her lap, eyes glassy. Across the room, Malcolm looked up from his newspaper and said nothing. He didn't have to. He simply walked over, placed a warm hand on her shoulder, and stayed. Surreal. Later that week, Sky Vista invited Evelyn to witness the first Seat 2A award ceremony, honoring employees who embodied empathy, equity, and excellence. Evelyn almost declined. She didn't enjoy being the center of attention. But this time she said yes. The event took place in an airplane hangar converted into a reception hall. Rows of chairs lined the floor beneath the fuselage of a retired Sky Vista jet. A banner hung above Seat 2A, a legacy of dignity. Jasmine, now promoted to lead flight attendant, took the stage. I used to think leadership meant being firm. After meeting Mrs. St. James, I've learned it also means being kind. Then she handed Evelyn a gift, a framed first-class boarding pass with Seat 2A, printed in gold. Below it was engraved. She didn't raise her voice. She raised the standard. Evelyn stood quietly, walked to the stage, and accepted it with a nod. She didn't give a speech. Instead, she turned to the audience, looked at every face, and simply said, I see you. I always have. And now I know you see me too. Ha ha ha, sussin. That evening, Evelyn and Malcolm flew home first class, of course. As she settled into 2A once again, she noticed something tucked into the seat pocket. It was a printed note. To the woman who reminded us how to fly with humanity, thank you. This seat will never forget you. She smiled. The flight attendant that night, a tall man in his early 30s with dreadlocks tied neatly back, walked up mid-flight and offered her a warm towel. He bent slightly and said, You probably don't remember me, but I was in the back galley the day it happened. I saw everything. I didn't speak up, and I've regretted it every day. Evelyn looked him in the eyes. But you're speaking now. He nodded. Yes, ma'am. She placed her hand gently over his. That matters. Well, the world didn't change overnight. There were still ugly headlines. Still moments where Evelyn read about someone else, humiliated, dismissed, erased. But now her inbox was also full of hopeful stories. A pilot in Phoenix who stepped in to defend a passenger with a disability. A manager in Dallas who rewrote hiring protocols to eliminate racial bias. A crew member in Atlanta who printed Evelyn's letter and kept it in her flight bag as a reminder. It wasn't a revolution, but it was a ripple turning into a tide. Out of Durham. On the one-year anniversary of the incident, Malcolm took Evelyn back to the airport not to fly, but to sit at Gate 12 where it all began. As they sat quietly together, sipping coffee, they watched a new flight crew prepare for boarding. Passengers lined up, black, white, brown, young, old, wealthy, modest, all filtering through the gate. No one hesitated. No one questioned who belonged. Malcolm leaned in and asked, Do you think they know? Evelyn smiled faintly. Maybe, or maybe they just feel it. She paused. When the sky remembers you, you don't need to explain. It had been over a year since Evelyn was slapped aboard that flight. Over a year since the world watched a woman remain still while dignity shook the air around her. Over a year since Seat 2A became more than a number, it became a symbol. And yet life had moved on, quietly, steadily. At home, Evelyn tended to her garden again. She made tea for Malcolm each morning, read books slowly, and kept a folder in her drawer with printed letters she received from strangers all around the country. She never once framed them. She didn't need the reminders. The faces stayed with her. Then one afternoon, she received an email from Sky Vista's new CEO, Adira Cole. It was short. We're retiring aircraft V972. We'd like you to join us on its final flight. You know the seat. Evelyn smiled. Petite in me. The day of the farewell flight arrived, and Evelyn and Malcolm were picked up in a car arranged by the airline. The chauffeur said little but wore a pin that read 2A in gold. At the airport, they were escorted through a private terminal to the gate where crew members stood waiting not to perform, but to pay quiet respect. The plane gleamed under the morning sun. It looked just like any other except for the small plaque near the boarding door. Aircraft V972 final flight, in honor of Evelyn St. James. She reminded us how to fly right. Boarding was simple, no fanfare, no speeches. Just Evelyn walking up the jet bridge slowly, deliberately, hand in hand with Malcolm. She took her seat 2A, and this time there was something new. A small plaque built into the seat's armrest. This seat is dedicated to all who were once made to feel unseen. May you sit in peace. May you rise in dignity. See, the flight was short, just a ceremonial hop from D.C. to New York, then back. But it was the longest Evelyn had ever flown without feeling like she had to prove she belonged. Come on. When the wheels touched down and the flight ended, the passengers applauded not for turbulence survived or a smooth landing, but for what that seat had come to mean. Reporters asked if Evelyn would give a statement. She declined. Instead, she walked across the tarmac, paused once, and looked back at the aircraft. Malcolm whispered beside her. You ready? She nodded. Yes, because that seat will keep speaking long after I've stopped. Years passed. Sky Vista evolved. The Seat 2A program was adopted across multiple industries, hospitals, banks, schools. It became shorthand for Don't Judge, Listen. College diversity workshops asked students, who was your Seat 2A moment? And in a quiet classroom in Detroit, a young girl stood up during show and tell holding a printout of Evelyn's open letter. My grandma said this lady helped the world see black women better, she said. So I want to be like her. Yuri. Evelyn never returned to the public eye after that final flight. She didn't need to. She had already taken the seat the world once said she couldn't. And in doing so, she made room for everyone else. This concludes the 7-part storytelling sequence for Flight Attendant slaps an elderly black woman not knowing that her husband owns the airline completed, according to Kitsch Band C, with consistent tone, 1,200 word parts, character continuity, and full emotional arc. Would you like me to begin step 2 now, including of curiosity-driven titles, 300-word SEO description with keyword, 10 hashtags let me know and I'll proceed. The next time Evelyn boarded a plane, it wasn't for a ceremony or a tribute or a final flight. It was just life. A quiet trip to attend her niece's graduation in Chicago. No cameras, no escort, just her and Malcolm side by side again as they had always been. But everything had changed. When she checked in at the Sky Vista counter, the young agent looked up at her and paused. You're? The woman started, her voice catching. Evelyn gave a small smile. I'm Evelyn, just Evelyn. The agent beamed. Welcome back, ma'am. Seat 2A is waiting for you. Suckershern, Western. On board, the atmosphere was peaceful. The flight attendants moved with warmth, not out of obligation, but out of understanding. They weren't trained to fear headlines anymore. They had been trained to recognize humanity. Across from Evelyn sat a middle-aged man in a tailored suit. He had watched her the moment she walked in, not staring but processing. When the flight leveled out, he leaned slightly across the aisle. I wanted to say, your story changed the way I manage my own company. Evelyn blinked, surprised. Oh, I run a logistics firm. We've had our share of diversity memos and seminars, but nothing stuck. Until someone printed out your letter and taped it to the break room wall. People read it, really read it. He paused. They started treating each other differently after that. Evelyn's eyes softened. That's all I ever hoped. At 35,000 feet, something strange happened. A flight attendant approached with a sealed envelope. Mrs. St. James, this was left for you by a previous passenger. Evelyn opened it slowly. Inside was a handwritten note. I sat in 2A last week. I thought about you the entire flight. And I treated every person I met that day like they belonged in first class too. Thank you. No name, no return address. Just an echo in the sky. Wissaruum. When the plane landed, Evelyn felt no ceremony, waiting, no speeches. But as she exited the jet bridge, a janitor sweeping the floor nodded and said, Thank you, ma'am. It wasn't loud. It didn't have to be. Respect doesn't need volume. That week, Evelyn met with a group of high school students invited to Sky Vista for a new outreach program. It was called Voices Before Uniforms, a way to connect real passengers and everyday workers with future aviation leaders. Evelyn sat on a stool in the center of the room, surrounded by teens of all backgrounds. Raise your hand, she said, if you've ever felt like you didn't belong somewhere. Every hand went up. Now raise your hand, she added, if you've ever made someone else feel that way. Slowly, awkwardly, a few more hands followed. Good, she nodded. You can't change what you don't admit. One girl, maybe 16, asked, Do you ever wish it didn't happen to you? Evelyn smiled faintly. Of course, but I also know if it had to happen to someone, I'm glad it happened to someone who had a voice, who wasn't afraid to speak. The room went quiet. You don't need a title to demand dignity, Evelyn continued. You just need to remember that no one gets to decide your worth, not based on your skin or your clothes or your seat number. Outside the room, Malcolm waited, watching from the hallway. He had seen his wife speak to boards, to journalists, to executives. But this was different. She wasn't correcting injustice anymore. She was planting resistance. Later that night, Evelyn sat in their quiet living room, sipping chamomile tea. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Jasmine, the young flight attendant, from that fateful flight. I've just been promoted to in-flight training supervisor. I've added your story to our orientation materials. Every new hire starts by hearing your name. Evelyn set the phone down, blinking back tears. She whispered softly, "Then I guess I'll never leave the skies." Hustikin. In a world where stories are forgotten in days, hers remained. Not because it was sensational, but because it was true. And truth has wings that never land. The training facility was quiet. It sat on the edge of an airfield in Denver designed to look like any other office campus: glass walls, concrete corridors, standard break rooms. But behind one set of security doors, a very different kind of meeting was about to take place. Adira Cole, now fully entrenched as CEO of Sky Vista, sat at the head of the table. She wasn't wearing a suit today, just a gray turtleneck and jeans. She wanted this moment to be about people, not power. Across from her sat Evelyn St. James. "I still don't know why you asked for me to be here," Evelyn said, folding her hands. Adira smiled. "Because we're rewriting the training manual, not just updating it, starting over. And I don't want a single word of that manual to be published until you've read it first." Evelyn blinked. She'd expected a discussion, not an invitation to shape the very foundation of the company's culture. "I'm not an expert on corporate policy. You're an expert on being ignored with grace," Adira said. "And that's something no policy can teach." A silence settled over the table. It wasn't awkward, it was reverent. Then Adira slid a draft of the first chapter across the table. It's titled, "Every Seat is Earned, Every Passenger is Equal." Evelyn read it slowly, paragraph by paragraph. The first section spoke of listening before judging. The second addressed subconscious bias, not in abstract academic terms, but in lived ones. The third offered real scenarios. A customer who doesn't speak English fluently, a man in worn clothes sitting in first class, an elderly woman traveling alone. Each scenario included two endings, one rooted in bias, the other in dignity. She paused at a line that read, "It's not about asking, do they belong here? It's about reminding yourself, I'm here to make them feel like they do." "That one," Evelyn said softly, tapping the page. "That needs to be bolded." Adira smiled. "It's bold now." It's, 2 weeks later, Evelyn stood in front of a class of new recruits, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. The training room was filled with young faces, nervous, eager, and uncertain. "I'm not here to lecture you," she began. "I'm here to remind you why this job matters." She paused. "I don't remember what Amanda said to me that day. That surprised the room. But I remember what she meant by it. And I remember what she didn't do. She didn't see me." She looked at them all. "When you forget someone's humanity, it doesn't make you stronger. It makes the cabin colder." A young man in the front row asked, "What do you do when a passenger is rude or demanding?" Evelyn smiled. "Be firm. Be professional. But always, always remember their dignity isn't yours to take away, even when they forget it themselves." One. After the session, a woman approached her in the hallway. Mid-30s, short hair, carrying a file folder. "I was on the flight that day," she said quietly. Evelyn tilted her head. "I was in the back galley. I didn't see everything. But I heard the slap. I heard it clear as day." She paused. "And I did nothing." Evelyn reached out and took her hand. "You're doing something now." The woman's eyes welled. "I became a trainer because of you." "Then you're exactly where you need to be." Train at the risk, sure. The new manual rolled out the following month. Printed on the inside cover just beneath the logo was a dedication for Evelyn St. James, who taught us that the cabin isn't just filled with passengers, it's filled with people. The airline didn't make a press release about it. No media circus. It wasn't performative, it was restorative. Suriname. That fall, Evelyn and Malcolm were invited to an alumni event at the Aviation Academy. She wore her signature beige. He wore his usual navy suit. They were greeted with hugs, not handshakes. During the banquet, a flight instructor stood up and made a toast. "We used to teach altitude speed safety. Now we also teach awareness. We used to teach how to serve. Now we teach how to see." Everyone raised their glasses. To Evelyn. She stood and looked around the room. "I'm not perfect," she said. "I didn't ask to be in this story. But if I had to go through it, I'm glad it ended with you all listening, not to my pain, but to the lesson underneath it. See you where they wish out for no ensuring maurna." That night, Evelyn received one more message. From Amanda. It was the first time she'd heard from her since that day on the plane. "Mrs. St. James, I've spent the past year in therapy and reflection and in humility. I won't ask for your forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know. I now work at a shelter. I listen more than I talk. And every time I catch myself making a snap judgment, I hear your silence. And it stops me. Amanda. Evelyn read the message once, then once more, and she whispered to herself, maybe that seat didn't change the world, but it changed enough people to matter. It wasn't the kind of honor she had ever expected or wanted, but it came anyway. 2 years after the slap that shook the cabin, Evelyn St. James's name was spoken not with pity, but with reverence. Not because she demanded it, but because the world for once had learned to remember the quiet ones. The Sky Vista Diversity and Inclusion Conference had never been a large event. A few dozen attendees, some PowerPoint slides, a keynote or two. But this year was different. Held at the company's new leadership center in Seattle, the auditorium was packed. The theme, the flight back to ourselves. Evelyn wasn't listed as a speaker. She didn't need to be. She simply sat in the front row, pearl earrings, beige sweater, a notebook in her lap, like she always carried more to listen than to be heard. The opening speaker, a young Filipino crew trainer named Ramon, stepped up to the podium. He glanced at his notes, then set them aside. I had a script, he said, but I'd rather tell a story. He looked at Evelyn. You probably don't remember me. I was a trainee during your visit to Denver. I didn't say a word then. I was afraid of sounding stupid. He paused. But then I watched how you listened. And I thought, if the most powerful person in the room doesn't have to speak loudly, maybe I don't either. He turned to the crowd. We name our planes after cities. We name our lounges after founders. But maybe it's time we name our values after someone who actually lived them. Applause rose like a gentle wave. At the closing dinner, Malcolm leaned toward Evelyn. You know they're going to ask to name something after you. She smirked. Let's hope it's not the lavatory. He chuckled. Knowing you'd accept it and make it meaningful. I'd call it the room for reflection, she quipped, and they both laughed. But a moment later, she grew serious. I just want them to remember that this wasn't about one moment. It was about everything that led to it. The glances, the doubts, the silence. That slap was just the echo. Malcolm nodded, and your response was the beginning of the sound. Promotion. A month later, Sky Vista made an announcement with no press release, no photos, no hype. A new aircraft had been commissioned. Boeing 787. Long-haul luxury, transatlantic routes. On the fuselage, just beneath the cockpit window in elegant lettering, were 4 simple words. The Evelyn St. James. Inside seat 2A had a plaque under the tray table. For every soul ever questioned, for every elder ever dismissed, for every woman who carried grace louder than anger. You are seen, you are welcome, you belong. When Evelyn boarded the inaugural flight of the Evelyn St. James, she did so without fanfare. A few executives were there, yes, but no ribbon cutting, no media wall. Just Evelyn, Malcolm, and a quiet nod from the captain. She took Sat 2A and closed her eyes. The air felt warmer, not because of the plane, because she had made the cabin human again. During the flight, a little girl no older than 7 walked past first class with her mother. She paused beside Evelyn's seat. The girl pointed shyly. Mommy, that's her. Her mother smiled. Yes, sweetheart. That's the lady who changed flying. Evelyn looked up, eyes soft. Hello, young one. The girl stepped closer. Do you still fly a lot? Evelyn chuckled. Enough to remember how beautiful the sky is. The girl thought for a second. When I grow up, can I sit here too? Evelyn smiled. You already do. Siri. As the plane descended, the sun poured through the clouds like it had been waiting for her. Malcolm took her hand. Proud of you, he whispered. She looked out the window. I didn't change the world, she said, but I helped it sit up straighter. He kissed her hand. And you reminded it how to speak softly and mean it. Long after the landing, long after Evelyn and Malcolm were gone, long after names faded from buildings and articles were buried beneath newer headlines, a quiet tradition endured. Flight attendants would walk new recruits to seat 2A on the Evelyn St. James and say, this is where dignity sat down and stood up for all of us. And the new hires would nod unsure at first. But then one day when the moment came for them to choose between silence and courage, between assumption and listening, they would remember the woman who wore beige and pearls, who never raised her voice but forever raised the bar. And in that moment, Evelyn would be there too, in the seat, in the air, in every act of grace that flew beyond fear.